I want to share with you this morning a sermon that's entitled All In, and my prayer for you today is that at the end of this service that there wouldn't be one person in this room but what you would not be all in to what God has called you to do. And this vision came about, it was the last day of my wife and I, Vicky's honeymoon in July of 2005. And I was awoken in the middle of the night, and there was a dream that I had had, and I woke up and I could not contain what was coming out of me. And I told Vicky, I said, get me some paper. And it's ironic, this last weekend we were cleaning out some storage containers that from when we moved, and actually found that piece of paper was written on legal paper because we had actually taken all of our files and stuff. We were mortgage brokers and real estate brokers at that time, and we were actually working on files. And I had a long piece of paper, and I wrote down these words as it came to me. And I want to just share this with you, and it might just give you a vision of why this is so important at this time in our lives. There were 5 people that I went to see in prison that day, and I don't even know why I was there. It was as if I showed up there, and one by one the guards would bring these people in wheelchairs down a long hall to a small room at the end. Each time the big metal door would open, the person who came through the door seemed so close to death. I could smell the death, and it would hit me that they were at the end of their life. The feeling so gripped me that I was overwhelmed with emotion. My guts ached, and my throat had a big lump in it as the day I was told my grandfather had died. Funny thing, I didn't even know these people. None of them even had names, just numbers. The first one was a woman. All were very old, and she told me how she grew up with her parents who used drugs and stole from everyone they met. She too had this life and ended up killing a convenience store clerk for $13 with her father's gun. As she told her story, I began to weep and tell her how sorry I was. She was 88 years old and had no one in her life. The second woman smelled like the first. She seemed so gray, it was as if she was already dead. As she looked into her eyes, and I was as if I was playing a video, and I could see every scene in her life. She was left in a dumpster at 3 days old, and someone found her. The people who had adopted her tried to give her a good life, but she could never shake the feeling of abandonment and went down the wrong path. She wasted her life, and at the age of 17, she killed a neighbor boy because he called her names and stole her bicycle. She was going to be released from prison in 6 days, but I didn't think she would live that long. She was 88. The third person was a man. I could tell he used to be very tall because his frame was still very gaunt and tall in the wheelchair, and his eye sockets were very dark and deep. He was very distraught as he talked to me about the pain that he had caused so many people. He grew up in a family where the parents lived off the state, and he could never get what he wanted. He wanted to be like the other children in school, so he would steal everything he wanted. One night he stole a car, and as he was trying to get away, he hit a car carrying a family of 5. Everyone in the car died. He lived but received a life sentence. He was so close to death, he was just waiting to see how long his lungs would keep him working for all the cigarettes that he had smoked. He was 88 years old. The fourth man was a Hispanic man with a deep scar all the way across his neck. When he was a boy, he was badly beaten by his father. He was a drunk, and his father would then tie him to his bed around his neck and tell him if he tried to get away, he would hang, but if it would really be no big deal. When he was 17, he took his father's gun and shot him while he slept. He now was going to be released at age 88 and nowhere to go. The last man was a black man who was very fragile and weak. He had no teeth, and the smell coming from him was almost unbearable. He too was close to death. His family was not a family. His mother was a prostitute, and he never knew his father. At age 15, he came home from school and killed a man his mother was with. He killed him with a butcher knife. It was ironic. He too was 88. Every one of these people had grown up just 5 blocks from a church. Everyone of them every Sunday. They would see the other kids going in and out of the church, but they never felt like they fit in anywhere else in life. Why would they fit in at a church? I never remember my dreams. I know the Lord has awakened me this night. I woke sweating and weeping as I recalled the people in my dream and the total look of total despair on each face. The question keeps ringing in my head, what will I do with the second half of my life? I am 44 years old. Right now, 2 times a week, we go into the Clark County Jail with our team of people to help when they're released, to help them transition, to stay on the right path. That was all birthed out of what you just heard right here and the partnership that we have with Faith Center Church. And my question to you today as I do this sermon, I want you to be all in. Today I can honestly say that we're all in. We're definitely all in. And the Lord is doing some amazing things here at Faith Center Church. And last night, 55 people came to the Lord and gave their hearts to the Lord. I want to talk a little bit today about one of my heroes in the Bible. And if you have your Bibles with me, you can turn over to Joshua 14. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years and 400 years of slavery in Egypt. And at one point, Moses sent out 12 spies, and the spies to spy out the promised land. And you're all familiar with the story. And one of them was named Caleb, and he came back with a positive report and silenced the people and said, let's go in, let's take possession of this land. We can do it. We can drive out drug addiction in Clark County. I believe that we can do this. But 10 out of the 12 spies, they had a bad report, and they said, it seems like these people are like grasshoppers in our sight. We're like grasshoppers in the eyes, and there's giants that we saw in this land. These guys are huge. They're amazing, and I just don't think we can do it. And I think that happens a lot in our lives where the things in life seem so insurmountable, so huge that how could we ever possibly imagine doing this? I can remember starting out in recovery ministry and how amazingly huge the odds were, and how amazingly there was no finances, and how amazingly there was so many people to reach. I'm sure it seemed like to those spies that went into the land, but 40 years later, God gives them a second chance. And I believe that God is giving us a chance today to do some supernatural things that He's laid on each one of us to do. And if you fast forward 45 years, Caleb is the oldest man in Israel. He's not the oldest man in Israel by a long shot, but he's getting up there. And his entire generation has died off, according to tradition. Joshua was probably less than half his age when maybe 17 years old when they explored the Promised Land, and Caleb was maybe 40, and now he's 85 years young. Dude's old. Doesn't look old to me anymore because I'm starting to creep up there. I'm not quite as old as Pastor Glenn, but I'm getting there. And that's where we pick up the story in Joshua chapter 14, verse 6. And it says, now the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions. The key part of that passage is, what are your convictions? You may be sitting in this service this morning and you've had some convictions all along, and they've sort of got muddled because life has crept in and life has come down on you, and then some of you have taken some left turns, or maybe you're just stagnant in here this morning, or maybe you're like me, you took some left turns and it took you a while to get back on center of what God really put in your heart and mind way back. And the key part of that is he said that it's very, I believe that you don't compromise your convictions. And his calling was, I was only 40 years old, and now I'm back. Now I'm ready to do what God's called me to do. And my question to you tonight this morning is, what is your calling? What is your calling in life? What did God set out for you to do? I'm beginning to see more clearly what my calling is every day as I walk down this path. And the cool thing about following God and your calling is you really don't know where you're going. Now, for some of you, that just freaks you out. But it's the best way to do it, and it's the best way that Caleb was the same way. I mean, he was just following God. He says, there's something down inside of me that's welling up that is calling me, that's pushing me forward. And as I look at this congregation this morning, and I see the integration that's taken place, and I see the fact that all of the worship team and Taryn and all of the people involved, it's amazing what God has done and how He's put this all together. And I know that one of the main reasons that this whole thing came about is because of your conviction of the fact that you had someone die in your church that was a very integral part, Gabriel, because of drug addiction. And what that did is it opened the door for this partnership. And so as we think about this morning, he said, my fellow Israelites, we went up with me, we made the hearts of the people melt in fear. And what I'm here to tell you this morning is, don't let the things around you make your heart melt in fear and diminish your faith. God has deposited a measure of faith in each person in this room today, that God wants it to grow and God wants it to flourish. And where are you at today? Are you going to let fear dictate your decisions? Are you going to let faith dictate your decisions? And I'm here to tell you that I'm ready to let faith dictate my decisions. So much that it just gets crazy in our life, right? Right now we have 5 recovery homes. We're housing over 44 people. Do the math on the utility bill there, right? Do the math on the toilet paper right there. I mean, that's getting serious right there, right? I don't know why that came to me. But are you living by the dictates of faith, believing that God's going to supply your needs according to His riches in Christ Jesus? Or are you going out there just thinking, well, I don't know if we can afford this? I don't think we can afford not to. Right? And there's 2 things that will take you in a very different direction. It's the difference between entering into the promised land and claiming the promises of God and experiencing miracles, or it's just spending your entire life on the other side of the Jordan wandering around and wondering, where is God? God is right here in the midst of us, right here in the middle of Clark County, and He's doing something, and there's a rumbling happening, and there's a spirit happening that I believe I have never seen in my life, but I'm in love with it every week. It's just crazy. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. In verse 8. So on the day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. That's a promise to us. And we don't have to have the future figured out. We just have to follow God wholeheartedly and say, God, what are you going to do next? And it's a new day every day. Don't you want to get up every day and have a new day of what God is going to do? Not what your finances dictate, not what your job dictates, but God, what do you want to do today in this community through me? Yeah, through you. Not just through the pastors. You are the church. We are the church. We're building an army of people that are committed to go and do something incredible for God. And we need the people of Faith Center to follow God wholeheartedly. And you're doing it. I think about just the children's church. I remember when we first got here at the first staff meeting after Saturday night service. Your children's pastor had a good look on her face. It was amazing. These are some interesting children. Right? Are we willing to roll up our sleeves and get dirty? Are we willing to go and do what God's called us to do? Oh man, it's been a journey, hasn't it? It's been a journey, but as I watched as the children's ministries got involved and they began to to interact and begin to minister to children that a lot of times they've come from broken situations and broken homes, and parents that maybe just got them back out of CPS care, and you guys have rallied around, and you've provided a safety net, and you've followed God wholeheartedly, and you said, God, what are we going to do next to help do the vision? You see, that's what I'm talking about. So in verse 10, it says, now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still, listen to this, I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. I like this. This is a young man in an 85-year-old body that makes this profoundly amazing statement. And if you look at the connective preposition there, the word as means identical. In other words, he was identical to the time when he was 40 years old as now he's 85. In the translation, he could bench press as much as 84 as he could at the age of 40, right? That's what it means. It means that he literally was as strong at 85 as he was at 40. It makes me think of Tim Randall. Tim Randall, you're not 85, and I'm not saying that. It's just, he's pretty strong for his age, right? This is an 85-year-old man that you don't want to mess with. And if you pick up the story again in verse 12, now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. He hasn't even shrunk back from his original goal and plan that God had laid upon his heart back then. And I'm here to tell you today that God is not wanting you to shrink back from your original plan that he has had from you since the time that you came on the face of this earth. God put something inside of you that he wants you to complete. And that's no different than what Caleb was going through there. He says, give me the hill country. Let's go do this. Doesn't that just send a tingle down your spine? To realize that God's assignment for him didn't change. God's assignment for you hasn't changed at all. And maybe you're sitting in this service today and you feel like it's just been warped by all of life's trials and troubles and things that you're dealing with. Can you just take a shot of what does God still have in store for me? What did he want me to do? You yourself heard that when it says, and the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, he says, I will drive them out just as he said. And then in 13 it says, then Joshua blessed Caleb and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb ever since because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. I think Caleb probably had days in those years that he doubted that it was ever going to happen. Trust me, I've had days where I've doubted, is it ever going to happen? And then one day, we stepped into Faith Center Church and we were at the promised land. Yeah, you guys think I'm crazy, but no, this is the promised land. Do you realize that I was here in 1987 when that cross right out front was dedicated?
That's awesome.
Wandered around a little while. Got back. How long do I have anyway? When do we quit here? I think Caleb had those days. I remember as we were remodeling the Grace Lodge, and the county had seen what we were doing in Clark County with people in recovery, and they gave us this building down on the Lewis River, and they said that if you guys remodel this, you can have it for $1 a year. 10 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, and we walked through there, and the place was just a shambles. There was ivy growing in the kitchen, and it had been vacant for 12 years, and we had $43 in the bank, and we said, yeah, we'll do this. $1 a year, we can afford that. In fact, we'll prepay it. Can we have 40 years? And God began to move. I remember that as we moved into that house, we moved into 1 bedroom in the middle of the house, and there was all kinds of vermin and stuff running in the other parts, so we barricade ourselves in the middle, and we had a camp stove and a tent out back, and we began to pray for God to bring in the resources to remodel this house. And he began to do it. And as we knocked out walls, he brought in 2x4s, and as we put up 2x4s, he brought in sheetrock, and as we pulled down the ceiling in the main kitchen and saw that the rats had eaten most of the wiring, he brought in electricians and wiring. And as the county said, well, you need to put in a $40,000 sprinkler system, because if you're going to use this to house people, you know you got to be around. And I remember the day that God brought all the materials, and the materials were delivered into the garage for free of charge. And then I started looking around and said, wonder how this goes together. What's this orange pipe anyways? And I knew it was special because they even had special glue and clamps and sprinkler heads and all this stuff. And I'm just shaking my head going, how are we going to do this? And then God brought the people to do it. And I remember the day when we said, man, we need some hard surface on the floors for this thing, and how are we going to do this? And I remember Vicki going out and knocking on doors, and she comes home. She says, this guy right down the street, he has 6 pallets of tile that he wants to give us. It doesn't match, but it's 6 pallets of tile, and he said that you could put it all together and make something out of it. And I remember driving the box van. It was a 79 green ugly box van that we got donated, and I went up and I said, okay, load it all in back in there. And he looked at me and he said, you want all this in there? And I said, yeah, put it in there. I only got 1.5 miles down the highway to go. And I remember, and he put it in there in pallets, and pretty soon I said, wait just a minute, take the 3 tile off because the back tires are rubbing. And he took 3 tile off, and I went down the highway. No state patrol, and I was good. I'm just here to tell you, we had no idea how is this all going to come together, and pretty soon it only took 3 years. And I was in construction, and I thought, well, this is going to be good. No problem. We'll just go in there and do this. Boom. 3 months, we're done, right? Got the plans, got everything. 3 years, really? See, I didn't have the checkbook I used to have. I had the checkbook from heaven. And he came and he did it, and it looks a lot different now. And it's just amazing how they gave us that house, and then they gave us 2 more that needed the same amount of work, but we were pros then. It's no big deal. It's like, really? Okay, yeah. These are only half the size. We got this. No problem. God's on our side. But what it did every time is it built my faith. It built our faith, and then we begin to conquer, and we begin to see, God, you can do this. And that was no different than Caleb standing there going, okay, my vision is still here. God called me to do this. And I think it looks like Caleb at 85-year-old, Caleb saying, give me the hill country. That to me looks like Exchange merging with Faith Center. That to me looks like driving out drug addiction in Clark County. That to me looks like faith-based housing for people getting back on their feet. That looks like, to me, like youth groups going into the schools and getting children before they come out the other side, so they never have to get addicted to heroin. They can go in there and they can have Bible studies and begin to infiltrate the schools. And there's a whole group of young people on Wednesday nights that are here that are being called out to go back into your schools and make a difference. You can make a difference. You can do this. It looks like children's ministries getting children grounded in their faith and filled with the Spirit at a young age, so they never have to go down that path of drug addiction. It looks like building buildings that are holding people out here. I mean, we need I don't know if you know it or not, but we need a huge building right out here. Right out here. At least 1,500 seat auditorium, at least. Because I was doing the math the other day. I'm not real bright, but I was doing the math. At 55 people, almost every week, 55 people get saved. We need some of you to come and help mentor these people to get them fired up for Jesus, right? And so what's happening is God is doing this, and we're going to run out of room. I mean, think about it. 55 times, I don't want to, it's a lot, right? It looks like you and me going all in and answering the call that God has put on your life. Here's what I love about Caleb. It's not just the fact that he was all in when he was 40. It's the fact that he was still all in at 85. He didn't retire at 65. He didn't even decide to play it safe at 70 and play shuffleboard at 75. He said he had the opportunity. If he would have had the opportunities available to him that we have today, he would have been skydiving at 80. He would have been climbing Mount Everest at 81. I mean, he would have been hiking around the rim of the Grand Canyon at 82 and running the Ironman triathlon at 83, right? I mean, at 85, he's going, let's get going, let's start a war, right? And that's where we're at right now. Are you ready to start a war? Are you ready to start a war against drug addiction in Clark County? Because I am, and I'm getting fired up every week when I see 40 people sitting right over in this section that we bus in from Lifeline Connections, their treatment facility, and they come in here, and last week we had 6 guys lined up on the wall, and I said, in case you guys are planning on doing drugs or selling drugs or getting drugs in this service tonight, you'll need to answer to those guys, right? Those ex-convicts right there. They'll give you another reentry program to go back into the jail, and it won't be to visit, right? You say, man, that's dangerous. You know what? Almost every week, 80% of those people come forward and say, God, I need to get rid of addiction in my life, and I need the power that you represent. I love the spirit of Caleb. You know, the simple answer is why he's as vigorous at 85 as he was at 40 is because his faith never diminished. His faith never shrunk back. In fact, his faith grew stronger over time. And in fact, his faith, is animated him and energized him in a way that I pray that we will experience. And I feel like I'm experiencing it. And I pray that God would give us the spirit of Caleb. And I think about what he went through and his mindset. Give me the hill country. The thing of it is, according to one Jewish rabbi, when Caleb was in the Promised Land scouting out the territory, at one point he left the 11 and he went off to Hebron because Hebron was there where his ancestors 500 years before were buried, and their grave sites were there, and Abraham lived much of his life in Hebron, and according to this tradition, he went to Hebron and fell down on his face and prayed on those grave sites where his ancestors were buried. Fell down and prayed. Do you think that was probably a powerful moment for Caleb in his life? Imagine the heartache when he silenced the people and said, we can surely do this. The Lord has called us to do it. We can do this. We can claim the Promised Land. And how devastatingly disappointing it must have been. 40 years he had to pray, and he had to pay the punishment for those who didn't have the faith to go in. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be sitting here another 30 years and wonder what we could have done. I want to go full bore, pedal to the metal, let's go, and let's get this done. And the next 30 years is going to, I mean, Glenn and I are getting old. We need some help, right? I mean, Glenn testifies that he's getting old all the time, but I'm not quite that feeling. But he never gave up on the promise, and that promise was in his heart, and it grew in his heart. And 45 years later, his passion was, give me the hill country. My question to you today, are you ready to take the hill country? Where's the place, let me ask you this, where's the place that you fell flat and asked the Lord for help? Do you have one? Has there been one? Maybe there's going to be one today. Maybe you're so just gummed up with all kinds of stuff going on in your life, and you've been distracted, and there's things going on, and you just don't know what to do next. Maybe it's time for you to fall down flat and say, God, what do you want to do? What hill country do you want to give me? Or is it faded because you just caught up in life? And I know that sometimes we take some detours. I'm all about talking with people that have taken detours. But the way Hebron is where Caleb's descendants, listen to this, a shepherd boy named David would be anointed king of Judah. Where for 7.5 years, again, because it was such an elevated, fortified place where it would make this capital city until it moved to Jerusalem. David doesn't have his capital unless a guy named Caleb is all in. Do you see the history that we're a part of? It goes back to Noah. It goes back to Abraham. It goes back to Caleb. If Caleb is not all in, they never claim the Promised Land, and they never experience the miracles that God does. And if you and I are not all in, we will miss out. We're driving out drug addiction in Clark County. We are doing it. There's no, there's people that are really ticked off right now. Most of them are drug dealers. I would say that there's probably, out of the 300 people that come here on Saturday nights, I would see probably 60% of those have been a drug dealer at one time or another in their life. See how we're doing that? Strategic. It's amazing to see a hardened man stand in front of this auditorium with his hands in the air weeping, saying, God, forgive me, take me back. Are you all in today? I want to show you a glimpse of what God is doing in this place.
See was the struggle, haunted by ghosts that lived in my past, bound up in shackles of all my failures. Prisoner and say to me, son, stop fighting a fight, it's already been won, and I am redeemed. You set me free, so I'll shake off these heavy chains and wipe away every stain. That I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. I'm redeemed. All my life I have been called unworthy, named by the voice of my shame and regret. But when I hear you whisper, child, lift up your head, I remember, oh God, you're not done with me yet. And I am redeemed. You set me free, so I'll shake off these heavy chains and wipe away every stain. Now I'm not who I used to be, because I don't have to be. The old man inside of me, 'cause his day is long dead and gone. Because I've got a new name, a new life, I'm not the same, and a hope that will carry me home. I am redeemed. You set me free, so I'll shake off these heavy chains and wipe away every stain. 'Cause I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. You set me free. 'cause I am redeemed.